Up next in this episode of iPrograms
I
podcast.
kept changing the specs. And we said, wait a minute. The specs were approved by you as originally. We cannot afford this. We can't turn around and change something on the fly when we're doing a construction project of that magnitude. I know you can speak chapter and verse to this, but you have to anticipate those unexpected costs. If you don't, you're in trouble.
Hi there, and welcome to the iPrograms podcast, The Art of Program Management. I'm Virginia Scheuer, your co-host, and I'm delighted to present our esteemed host, Dr. Bill Bersing, president of iPrograms IPS, Institute for Program Solutions, and our distinguished guest today, David Dodd, founding CEO of the International Sustainable Resilience Center. Dr. Bill is a registered professional engineer in Virginia with 30 years of experience, specializing in construction scheduling, cost control, and construction management information systems. His expertise has led him to work on successful programs in the U.S., Puerto Rico, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. David Dodd's journey began with recovery from Hurricane Katrina, leading him to collaborate with Mexico and Japan after major earthquakes and consulting with Australia and the Philippines on coastal and city flooding. His diverse experiences have allowed him to support recovery efforts globally while emphasizing public-private partnerships. With Dr. Bill's extensive experience in managing complex programs and David Dodd's expertise in disaster resilience and recovery, we're excited to explore the last 5 of the top 10 challenges of program complexities. Join us now as we delve into these intricate issues and discover strategies to overcome them.
We have a lot to cover today. We have, of course, our CEO and president, Dr. Bill Bersing here, and also Mr. David Dodd here. Welcome to iPrograms podcast. We're excited to have your expertise here. So let's go ahead and get started. You guys ready?
Maybe it'd be good to introduce David Dodd and just give us kind of a. I don't know if the audience understands who you are and what you're doing and what your business is. You have a nonprofit organization and public-private partnership, and we worked together for the past, 10 years now, going on 10 years, which kind of ages us, I guess, as well.
Yeah, well, we started as teenagers. We were working together as teenagers, so we'll say that. No, it's a real honor to be here. My background is in finance and economic development. And 19 years ago, thanks to Katrina, I was thrust into Hurricane Katrina thrust me into disaster recovery and resilience. And I have a nonprofit, and I'm honored that Bill is on my advisory board. We're dedicated to increasing capacity for resilience, climate adaptation. They're basically the same thing around the world. I'm affiliated with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe through work that I'm doing for them now to integrate resilience, climate adaptation into all public-private partnerships, and most of those are large infrastructure projects. So that's where Bill and I intersected because of my work there and the work that I'm doing with disaster resilience in particular, which involves projects. But my main experience, actual on the ground experience, is doing disaster recovery. And disaster recovery is a very complex project, and managing that requires a lot of skill and a lot of the elements we're going to talk about today, Bill. So again, I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, no, thank you. Your background is mostly economic and development, financial aspects of it, as well as managing the larger programs, right? I mean, it's not engineering absolutely. Like my background, so we kind of feed off each other. So yeah, I like to hear some of your responses on this.
We have the first part was about the 5 of the 10 challenges in program management, and today we're talking about the second 5. And Dr. Bill has supplied us with questions for today, so I will ask you both questions and see what those answers are. So let's go ahead and get started. Coordinating with multiple stakeholders How do you identify all relevant stakeholders within a project or a program?
That's the most critical element of managing a disaster recovery project. The stakeholders, in fact, one of the principles of the economic recovery support under the National Recovery Framework is local primacy. You have to identify the relevant stakeholders. And in a project, a construction project especially, Bill, you know the importance of that. And if you don't do that, if you don't identify the relevant stakeholders in any project of that magnitude, you are increasing your risk. So that to me is absolutely critical, and it's the first thing you must do.
Yeah, from my perspective, again, we have totally different perspective. It's good that you say this because you're coming from a very high level, paying for these disasters. I think on these larger programs is really critical that you understand who the stakeholders are. But for my level of doing this as program management with construction, it is keeping all parties, including the client, the contractors, subcontractors, the suppliers, the government bodies, keep them all aligned. And the way we begin doing that is we usually come up with a good organization chart, that includes all the stakeholders, and then some of them play a key role and some of them don't. So you type in key, to that person. And then if it's the construction management team, like the program management team, then we have a program management plan, which also includes that organizational chart. And then it outlines every one of the key stakeholders and outlines especially the key stakeholders and what their email addresses and how you're supposed to communicate. And then, at the beginning of this whole thing, we have a kickoff meeting and partnering workshops, hopefully, and this and that. So it's a good question, and I agree. It's very crucial that we identify those key stakeholders.
And what you outlined, Bill, is exactly the same process we go through. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and we have a project management plan. That's the first thing we do. So there's again, the differences are in what we're doing, but how we're doing it, I think, is as we go through these questions, it's probably going to be almost identical.
Yeah. And I guess for brevity, I think the second question is, what strategies do you use to handle conflict among stakeholders during the project? I think I gave you my answer before, but what are your quick thoughts, Dave?
Well, to me, the best way to resolve conflict is to address it immediately. Don't wait. And there are a lot of resources available for mediation, conflict avoidance. There are professionals that can do that, but you can also there are also a tremendous amount of resources that you could use to resolve and avoid conflict. But the most important thing to me, Bill, is you got to address it right at its source, and look at the elephant in the room and say, okay, we've got an issue here. Let's resolve it.
Yeah, I agree. And, we call it zippering them up. When you have an organization and you have like a contractor, customer, or construction management team, we say, okay, the CM works with the, contractor CM, the QA works with the QC, quality control versus quality assurance. Those, if they have a problem, then they go to the CM. If they have a problem, they go to the program manager. If they have a problem, you just go to the senior level GS 14 or 15, or government service person, and that person would go to the vice president of the contractor. And if all of that fails, then we have an alternate dispute resolution type thing, the process that's pretty standard in our industry. No, I mean, it's another question there too. I mean, we got codes, and that's another question here, regulations and all. But on a program that we were doing before, a few months ago, we had this conflict between our end users of the labs and the people that were like the AHJ, authority having jurisdiction, or even the contractor, to say, hey, what codes apply? And everybody has an answer, especially if you're a scientist. It's how do you resolve something like that? I don't know. That's a new one on me.
Well, in FEMA, the way the framework works is FEMA is over all of these other agencies that are doing recovery. And so FEMA came out of the military. So you have a command structure that's very defined, and they define up front how you resolve conflict. Where do you need to go to resolve it? And they even have, in the larger recovery operations, they even have a conflict resolution person as a part of the recovery team.
Yeah. So, I had that too. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Then even people to resolve conflicts within the community, because sometimes the community is involved in these larger programs, and so we have to have marketing, whatever you call them. There's a name for them, I think. You've probably seen it too, Dave. Community relations, conflict.
Community relations.
Yeah.
And again, this is a part of the structure for these massive recovery operations, and there is a private sector group that is their responsibility, is to ensure that the community the area that's being repaired and rebuilt, to ensure that they are comfortable with that they are okay with that there's no underlying issue that's going to pop up out of nowhere. Because in the projects you do, Bill, the last thing you want is that kind of surprise. That's why communication, we've talked about this before. That's why communication is the absolute most critical element of any project. I don't care if it's a $50-60 billion recovery project like we did after Sandy, or it's a $10 million construction project. Communication is absolutely the most essential thing, in my opinion. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, it's that high level communication, that trust with the teams. I mean, I think you got to have the team together face to face, at least initially, and if you need to work separately, it's good. But the whole virtual thing, virtual executive leadership type stuff, there's got to be a lot of thought to that, because it's hard to get those leaders who need to manage these programs to have that trusting relationship without having had worked together for many, many years. Usually it takes that much time to be a high performance unit. I think some of the agile project management, all those techniques, I think that's great. I think we can use a lot of that. Meeting more often, virtually probably helps a little bit better, but there's nothing that beats the face-to-face when it comes to this stuff and building trust.
You're exactly right. It's so funny that the largest recovery project I worked on was in Puerto Rico. And in Puerto Rico, because of the magnitude of what needed to be done, we adopted agile project management. And
did you?
Yeah, and we actually gave, as you know, I subcontract for a pretty substantial government contractor, Novasis, and that's their thing is quality management. That's how they got started. So we did PMP training, project management professional training for the organizations we were working with in Puerto Rico, so that they could better manage these massive recovery projects that were going on.
Yeah, no, that's important. And now with the PMP, so I've been told, agile project management. I used to teach in project management in their courses and go through it. Yeah. But they've recently added agile project management to this stuff, which is even more amazing. And recently in the project that I'm working in, the program I'm working on currently, it's we've done some of the agile stuff only because of COVID. And just, usually agile, you think of it and it's more the IT type industry, but I tell you, it works if you tweak it.
No, I agree.
So in cost management, Dr. Bill, you talk about keeping projects within budget while coping with fluctuating material costs and other financial uncertainties. So how do you address budget overruns or unexpected costs?
as the economic development guy, you probably have I have pretty good experience in it doing scheduling and all the cost estimating and budget and all the data analytics and all that stuff. But I bet you have a pretty good answer there, Dave.
Well, I mean, I think when you're estimating cost, I think it's absolutely essential that you take into account that things could change. Things will change. When you're talking about a project, when I did economic development, I managed, several construction projects as a part of my job. And when you take on a construction project, you had better be absolutely certain that you have made contingencies available to take care of these unexpected cost fluctuations and changes. I had a project once when we were doing an expansion of a large manufacturing facility, and the problem we had was the communication with the client, because the client kept changing I'm sure you've had this. The client kept changing the specs, and we said, "Wait a minute. The specs were approved by you as originally. We cannot afford this. We can't turn around and change something on the fly when we're doing a construction project at that magnitude." I know you can speak chapter and verse to this, but you have to anticipate those unexpected costs. If you don't, you're in trouble.
I used to laugh because I worked in what they call the Naples Improvement Initiative years back, and that was a pretty big, huge program to build out the U.S. Navy base and relocate them because of some earthquakes and some things that were concerning to the U.S. Navy in Naples, Italy. But I used to laugh because it was really the first PPP. We call it lease construct contract, but it's really a public-private partnership with the Italian, usually the Italian government and some of the entities down there that own some of the properties. So we did this thing with them, and it was, it was pretty solid. Here's the design efforts. Here's what we're going to build. But they would go back in and say, "Hey, let's do this. Let's do that." And I'm laughing because I did all the scheduling. We had about 5-10 people out there working for O'Brien Kreitzberg, and that was bought by a URS. But we used to say, "Hey, let's put a pole on top of the building, and see what happens." And we did a couple things, and they just did it. It was all legal and everything. It was just kind of funny because if you spread a rumor that this was supposed to be in it, it was coming in, and there was a budget aspect of this. And you got to really put, as the program manager, you got to put your hand around it and say, "This is what our expectations are. We don't need poles on top of buildings for the U.S. Navy. We don't need this and that." But that was part of that project. Naviana 2000 was another one that it was a little different because it was mostly design build or design bid build type construction, but it was all NATO. So you're talking about your problems with trying to get money for stuff. Can you imagine with different shareholders and that? At the end of the day, we had to pull in the stakeholders. We had to hire about 5 native people, NATO members, civilians, to come in and manage the budget. Well worth the money, but it was tough.
That's a really good solution, but there's a cost to that in and of itself. You're having to pay the budget manager to manage to keep things from being overrun, and that the payment to that, which they aren't cheap. These guys charge a lot. So you're again, there's a reason not everyone does what you do, Bill.
I want to sell it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think it really can, just like early construction management involvement, it's in your programs that you're talking about. I mean, it's worth its weight in gold. I mean, it's always been proven to save money in the long run, but people don't see the need for it until the end because they think they can manage it all. Yeah. Right. So you want to go to the next question there?
Well, actually, you answered the question,
okay.
And that was how does effective cost management contribute to the overall success of the program or project? So that answers it. Saving money. What else did you say?
Well, having a full-time person in charge, is like budget analyst or data analytics or whatever, is extremely important. You got to know where it is, and then you have to track even the qualitative aspects of it. of the program and project with data, just to say, hey, this is what we're doing. We're taking too long to do our change orders, or we're taking too long to do our submittals, or doing all the budgets and stuff. You have to have somebody to review the submittals and invoices, and making sure that we have that contingency cost that Dave was talking about there. But yeah.
So time and money.
Save
money.
Good. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. The third challenge here today is schedule adherence. Dr. Bell talks about ensuring projects stay on track despite delays caused by weather, labor issues, or logistical challenges. What methods do you, David, employ to handle unforeseen challenges such as, like I said, weather or labor issues or schedule?
I'll give you an example. We were in the middle of a recovery operation for a flood that hit Louisiana in March of 2016. In August of 2016, another even worse 1,000-year flood occurred in the area in which we were already doing recovery. We had to completely re-engineer that operation because of the magnitude of the second event happening in the middle of the first event.
Wow.
And so that required us to step back, reassess, and then recalibrate our project management plan in a major way. So the thing is, it can't be done. You're better off if you take steps to anticipate that this might happen. And I think that's the real key, Bill, is to ensure that your project plan has the ability to change if something unexpected, whether it's a natural disaster or something else that's totally unexpected, happens. And things happen.
Yeah, no, we were talking last, I don't know if you've even seen it, but the last episode about risk management and managing risk at a high level is just so important to this. And I think you're stepping on that a little bit. But yeah, my perspective on this thing is that, we always begin in source construction management with a schedule, critical path schedule. I use Primavera, pretty good with it. Where you have predecessor, successor, before and after activities, and your durations. Make sure that you have your resources loaded and cost loading, and you can have a resource-driven schedule, which I've seen at Qatar, which is amazing. To help avoid some of the unforeseens and the weather and the labor stuff, where they just say, okay, we need 100 more people of laying rebar for this major stations or this whatever it is. It's something that's extremely important to understand what it is that you can and can't do on a project as well. With COVID, it was just all about, hey, how do you get your people out here? Who's got, some of the places you need passes and IDs to get in? How do you manage that in COVID environment? How do you get the logistics when you can't get your transformers in on time? So all of that has to be outlined, and using your tools, which is the integrated master schedule included on these programs. And I didn't write this down or anything, but we've developed integrated master schedules for West Point academic building upgrade program, for all the the NAVFAC stuff, for all the big programs. And when you do that, it's a science, but it's really an art. You got to come in, you got to be nimble. You have to, like you're saying, you have to understand where you're flexible, where you're not, where you need to add. Here's the milestones, here's the constraints, because usually you're only allowed one constraint at the beginning, one constraint at the end, and then everything flow in your schedule and your critical path. But sometimes you have to figure it out, and it's not so easy.
No, absolutely.
Handling them is it's definitely something that you can't just let it happen. But then again,
that's a very good point. You can't just let it happen. You have to prepare for this. You have to prepare, and you have to be able to respond quickly. And that to me is one of the advantages of agile project management, because those elements are built in If you take training for APM, that's a part and parcel of the system, is to be able to make changes and be able to recast the project because of the new circumstances.
Yeah.
That's great. What about regulatory compliance? So, navigating the complex web of local, regional, and national regulations and ensuring all aspects of a project are compliant. What strategies do you use to ensure compliance with various regulations and standards?
Yeah, well, this is one of the most difficult and perplexing things, especially if you're working in another country where you may not be as familiar. And a lot of regulation is based on the culture and the norms, and understanding that, I'm sure some people are going, David, what does culture have to do with project management? It has everything to do with it, especially when you're talking about norms and regulations, and you're talking about places that I was doing a project in Mexico, and we were almost, we were slapped on the wrist. We were almost halted because the culture demands that people are given the opportunity, especially in the afternoon, to take a break. And, we know it here in the States is a siesta, but, that is a part of the culture. And there are regulations that adhere that make that. So again, it's Bill, I think you have to know where you are. You have to know the policies, you have to know the laws, you have to know the regs, you have to know the culture to effectively manage a project, no matter where you are.
Yeah, along those same lines, we were at a meeting for the Society of American Military Engineers in Winchester, the Middle East District, where the Army Corps of Engineers gave their program briefs. And one of the questions that came up from one of the attendees there to the Corps of Engineers was, hey, what about this requirement? Because in all U.S. government requirements for all U.S. government contracts, we have to meet the codes and standards and regulations of whichever one's higher, whichever the U.S. standard or the standard for that country. And they got up and they said, hey, you got to give us a break on this. You really don't understand, or you do understand, but they've been doing it a while, so they know what this means. And yeah. I've been doing it a while, and I'm kind of scratching my head on this too, because it's usually whichever one is. It's usually black and white, but a lot of times it isn't. Like what you're saying with the siestas and all that, but I'm talking about like real code for steel or real code for this and that. In Tajikistan, they had a real code for steel, and it was huge because they couldn't get any other steel but the Chinese steel, which, there's a safety factor of 500.
Well, sure.
So for the U.S. government to say, hey, whatever one's greater, then they're going to require all this steel. That's not great. That's mind-boggling.
Can we say catch-22? You're in a catch-22.
Yeah, you are. So I don't know how to answer that question, except for the fact that they need to understand the different countries and what's required. And then many of the answers were that a lot of these countries, because we did standard codes and regulations for all of the Horn of Africa and one of the projects I was doing, and we just looked at each one of the countries, and they based their stuff on the standards for the U.S., ASTM, whatever standards we had. They would actually copy and paste it and just translate it to their language or whatever, and then they use some of the English stuff, but then it's mostly U.S. standards. But yeah, we just have to be able to say, okay, rationally think through the situation. Our laws and our specs and our plans aren't always the best. Let's figure it out, and it's usually all about cost and time that it takes to get in there for the programs. The contractors have been on the job doing it as if they're in whatever Bahrain or whatever country. Yeah. And then we're saying, no, you got to meet the standard, a U.S. standard that's like, okay, well, I'm going to have to get this transformer that's, made of stainless steel in the U.S. And it's going to be, I didn't put that in my bid, to do that. And,
Wait a minute, we already talked about cost overruns.
They all tie into each other, because if you don't,
they absolutely do.
standard,
That's
then
the
you're
point.
like blowing your budget.
Yeah,
all your profit is lost because somebody's saying, here's this one FAR clause, one regulation that you didn't really consider. But you're like, okay, well, I bid the project as if I'm here in Bahrain or wherever country. Anyway,
no, I think you brought up such an important point. Bill just did, Virginia. The point is that these things aren't in silos. We're talking about them because we need to separate them to be able to address each individual one. But they all influence each other. They all have, as you just gave the example, Bill, they all have impacts on each other, these different elements of project management. And I think understanding that and that interconnectivity, and that one can greatly influence the other of these factors we're talking about, these issues, is really critical.
Yep.
I'm really seeing that. I'm really seeing that with all of this, how it's all just so interconnected. And if one piece of this puzzle kind of falls, a lot of the other pieces can kind of fall apart as well. And that, regulatory compliance leads right into quality control. So Dr. Bill says maintaining high standards of construction quality to prevent costly reworks and ensure long-term durability. What measures do you take to ensure high quality standards are met?
You're now dipping back to when I was 6 months old. That's what you're doing, because I was a huge disciple of TQM. And go ahead, Bill. I'll save my comments because.
Yeah, I could talk forever on this topic. It's construction management's all about 3-phase inspection and quality, management process. The Army Corps gives, and the NAFAC and the Navy kind of understand, preparatory initial follow-up inspections. But there's two aspects of this. When we talk about construction quality control, quality assurance, it's the same but a little different when you talk about corporate quality assurance, quality plan. And they say the number one thing to do with corporate quality control is get a sign off, some type of something from your president of your company, and put it on the walls, saying, hey, this is what we do. We want quality. And,
exactly.
You have to know what it means. If I say I want a mirror, and you're saying, well, that's not quality mirror. Well, you specified a mirror with a frame on it that's, plastic. So I'm giving you a quality product. It's a plastic. We're not, and they expected, a gold something, frame around it. And that's just one of the examples that you give when you talk about quality. You have to know what the expectations of quality is, because my wife's quality on what I do, cleaning the kitchen, is definitely not my quality. And I know my wife, Virginia. So.
Yes, that's a great point, and also a great confession.
Yeah, well,
for me, it goes back when I actually saw W. Edwards Deming, the father of TQM. I was in diapers, Virginia. That's how young I was. But
you saw him? You met him?
I saw him in person.
No way! Cool.
Yes, I did.
That's great. Yeah. Awesome.
I did.
Yeah.
And when that at that presentation, he railed against quality programs. He said, quality is not a program. Quality is a way of doing business. It's a way of doing everything. And what you just said, Bill, taking that and putting that on the wall, that this is our goal for quality. This is what we want to do in our operation, in the business.
Yeah, that's a Deming thing. I think I took that straight from. Yeah,
1,000%. But it's still relevant today. That's my point.
It is. Yeah.
Still, and maybe it's more relevant than it's ever been, because everything that you do, everything that I do has become more complex, more complicated. So what we have to do is ensure that every second of every minute of every hour of every day are the people with us are empowered to make the decisions and that we have that standard that we hold constantly.
Okay, I just want to follow up with a question that just came to mind was subjective. Is quality sometimes subjective?
Yeah. I mean, you have
And
to know.
does that cause, somebody's one view of what the quality should be on a program or project differ, and that's how the decisions that are made are based on somebody's subjective, or there is an objective, like there is a standard that you have to live to, or do the work by. And I can imagine culturally too, quality just looks different. Is that true?
It is. That's true to some extent. There are some certain bedrock principles that are universal, but I'll give you a great example of this. So we had a community. It was part of the economic development effort in the city that I was in. We had a community quality program, and we had an early TQM expert teach businesses, would send teams, and they would teach those teams how to implement TQM. There was a company that was a pipe company, and they kept having quality problems with this pipe. And one of the workers on the floor, in Toyota, any worker can stop the assembly line. Any worker in the plant can stop the assembly line if they see something wrong. So this worker said, there's a problem here, and I think I know what it is. So they took a piece of this pipe and they sent it for analysis, came back. They were bending those pipes to a 90-degree angle. They were custom pipes. They were like this. Well, they had an identity stamp. They stamped the pipe with this identity stamp, so people out in the field were know where it was produced, so it could be replaced. Where they were placing that stamp was weakening the structural integrity of that metal just very slightly. But it was enough that when they bent where that stamp was, it sacrificed the integrity of the pipe.
Wow.
Okay.
And so that's a blend of subjective. The operator that was running the bending machine said something's not right here, and objective when they did the analysis, the integrity analysis, and they found this problem. So what they ended up saying that this saved them almost $1 million a year because of not having to replace those pipes that were compromised because of one person.
Yeah, along those same lines with program management on some of these larger construction programs, I've seen a lot of and analyzed a lot of claims and a lot of fights between contractors, the owners, whoever it is. And many of the perceptions that you have is that the contractor quality is not right, and they give that to the reason for, having the argument, and it's a perception that they have of what the standard of quality is. And mostly because they weren't on top of it. If you're doing quality assurance, preparatory initial follow-up inspections, and you see something that's wrong, you need to make sure it's corrected or it's done in time. And
Absolutely.
You can't just make the broad statement that this whatever building is not quality without getting into what do you mean by that? Did you meet the specifications and the plans? Well, yeah, you did. If they did, but they're a little late, or they did, but there's a differing site condition, didn't allow them to do what they had to do, then you got to go back in and see what you're doing and get the experts, whether it's the designer record or somebody back in there to kind of look at it as an expert to look at it. But if you have a person who's not an engineer, who's a construction manager, or who's doesn't have that experience, I'm probably a qualified construction manager, but doesn't have the electrical experience reviewing the architectural stuff as well as the civil, and then it just gets very confusing very quickly, and then you lose that trust,
Exactly.
And it's on these programs, it's all about maintaining the trust.
Absolutely.
And then you throw in ethics and all this stuff, and then it gets even worse, Ethics is a big one when it comes to quality and time and looking at everything.
When you're looking at quality, you have, the regulatory, like you have codes and things that you have to stick to for quality, and it differs between all the cultures, or all the places that you do these things. Do you have standards, quality standards that are perhaps above and beyond what codes are in different countries that you try to uphold when you go into these programs, Dr. Bill?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there's a reason why the U.S. Corps of Engineers says, and the Navy says, hey, when you're in a different country, either apply our U.S. codes or the country's codes. There's a foreign military sales, there's all these things, but the foreign governments love us doing construction over there because they get quality products. They're going to build a dormitory or build a, airframe or whatever bunker to that's going to be it's going to last. It's going to be good. There's no corruption involved, and it's just going to, stand out.
Right. And David, what about in disaster relief?
Yeah, no, I think we do the same thing. When we were in Japan and we were doing the recovery framework for the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami, and that was the most, at the time it happened, and I think it still is, the costliest disaster ever. And the magnitude of that reconstruction dictated that they apply the most stringent quality standards. Of course, TQM came out of Japan, so it's not like it's something they weren't familiar with. But when you have, they had to rebuild. I don't know the number, but I know how large the area was because I toured it. They had to rebuild all of these cities, and some of them were not communities like 2,000 or 3,000. They were cities of 40,000 or 50,000 dollars, were completely obliterated. So undertaking a project that massive, and I think, Bill, you can speak to this. When you take on a project that is of a certain magnitude, that's very complex, has many different components, maintaining those standards is exponentially more difficult.
Yeah, there is an element to that too. That's a good point.
And again, when you're working in a developing country and you're doing disaster recovery and reconstruction in a developing country, that's when you run into, sometimes that goes back to our conflict, because sometimes I've had situations where we expected a certain level of quality, and the client, whether it's a public, whether it's a government or a private client, said, "Oh, we don't need to go that far. We don't need to implement these standards. That's too much. That's too much." And what they're saying is they don't want to have to pay. And it's not. And the thing I always say, and Bill, you know this because this is what I say about disaster resilience and adaptation. It's not a cost. It's an investment. You're investing in the future of that facility by building it to a higher standard.
Yeah. I think that's it. We've uncovered the 5 challenges, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, David, for being on with us today. And this has been so enlightening. This has been so good. So thanks.
Well, thank you. Bill asked me, I'm there. Whatever Bill asked, I'm there.
Yeah,
I think I said this to you in an email yesterday. I'm going to say it to his face. One of the finest people I've ever met in my life is the guy you work with.
You can quote him on that one.
Put it up on LinkedIn. I'll sign it. I'll sign it. I'll sign it so you can put it in your office. When your employees come in there upset about something, say, "Look what this guy said."
It's a long way home, thinking about that city.